She was talking to no one in the quiet interior of an elevator, moving slowly up a 50-story building on Wacker Drive. Her hands were pressed firmly behind her back, with her fingernails digging deep into her palms to stop the trembling. Her voice stayed low and steady as she rehearsed answers to questions nobody in that building had asked her yet. The elevator moved upward. The man standing 3 feet to her left had stepped into the cabin on the 38th floor without pressing a destination button. He was wearing a simple dark pullover and held a leather gym bag in his left hand while his dark phone screen rested in his right palm. The interview she had spent 3 weeks preparing for was 9 minutes away behind a frosted glass door on the 48th floor. She did not know that. The cabin was old and moved with the slow mechanical groan of machinery that knew it was scheduled for complete replacement next spring. It created an enclosed space where two strangers had nowhere to look except at the floor indicator lights creeping steadily past the numbers. She adjusted her posture against the steel wall and shifted her weight to her left foot to relieve the pressure on her heel. Then she spoke again. Her voice had the calm cadence of someone who had practiced being heard in crowded rooms that rarely wanted to listen. She was rehearsing an answer to a question about her ability to manage conflicting priorities under extreme pressure. She said she had learned to organize her daily hours the way financial accountants organize vanishing corporate funds. She explained that when you are the only adult in a household, every single minute must have an assigned job. Minutes without jobs did not exist. She said it without theatrical emphasis, or the hollow buzzwords that hiring managers expect and immediately forget after 30 seconds. Damon Vance stood with his thumb resting half an inch above his phone screen as the elevator passed the 14th floor. His thumb stopped moving entirely. He did not unlock the device. He held it dark. He had planned to exit on the 30th floor for an executive quarterly review meeting he had already memorized the slide deck for. His right arm moved slightly toward the floor control panel. His fingers never touched the button. He simply stood there listening. The navy blue blazer she was wearing did not fit her frame with exact precision. The shoulders sat 3 inches too wide in the way a garment sits when it was tailored for someone else's body. But the jacket was spotless and had been pressed with visible patience, using a warm iron over a damp towel. The cuffs at her wrists had been re-hemmed by hand with neat stitches. Someone had taken a needle and thread to those sleeves to make them presentable. Her black leather shoes were older than the mended blazer she wore. They were polished to the quiet shine that comes from disciplined effort rather than expensive store-bought cream. The leather sole on the left shoe was thinner than the right by 1/4 of an inch. She had been walking unevenly across Chicago transit platforms for a very long time. She held her synthetic leather handbag with both hands in front of her waist. Her grip was firm. The floor indicator light changed from 21 to 22 with a soft chime. Nia took a controlled breath and transitioned to the next question on her mental list. Her tone did not become louder, but it acquired a deeper level of composure. It was the composure that arrives when a person has spoken a difficult truth enough times to stop fearing its impact. Her voice remained clear. "What is your greatest weakness as a professional candidate?" She paused for 2 seconds before filling the small space between them with her answer. "My greatest weakness is time itself," she said softly. "Not managing time, but having enough of it available in a single day. I am raising 2 children alone in Southside Chicago. One is 7 years old and one is 4. I do not have a co-parent or extended family living anywhere within 300 miles of this city. Every hour I spend sitting in an office is an hour someone else is being paid $92 to watch my children. That cost comes out of the exact same bi-weekly paycheck the work is supposed to provide. So I have learned to produce more value per hour than most people feel necessary. Not because I am superior, but because I do not possess the luxury of being slow." The elevator climbed past 30 as the cables hummed overhead. Damon did not move his feet. He did not look directly at her face. He kept his eyes fixed on the small digital indicator above the heavy sliding doors without reading the ascending numbers. He was listening to a young black woman state the relentless mathematics of a life he had once witnessed from the inside. She was not performing for an audience. That was the crucial detail. The sentences she uttered did not sound like carefully rehearsed corporate responses. They sounded like undeniable facts. They carried the absolute certainty of a person declaring her birth name or her height. It was information that required no emotional decoration because it was simply true. The elevator reached 30 and came to a smooth halt. The sliding doors opened wide to reveal a brightly lit executive reception lobby. Damon did not step out into the hallway. The doors closed again. She did not notice. She had already moved forward to the final question on her invisible list. She was telling the empty air 3 feet in front of her why she wanted this specific position, Advanced Global Logistics. She did not cite corporate culture or strategic alignment or industry leadership. She cited stability. She spoke the word as if it carried a heavy physical weight she had been carrying uphill for 16 consecutive months. The cabin passed 34, 36, and approached 38. She stopped speaking entirely. She straightened the lapels of her borrowed blazer with both hands. She adjusted the shoulder strap of her handbag. She took one deep breath. The doors opened on 48 with a quiet tone. She stepped out onto the carpeted hallway without looking back toward the elevator cabin. Damon stepped out 2 seconds behind her. She turned left toward the main guest reception counter. He turned right toward his private executive office suite. She did not see him go. She did not know that the hallway she was walking down and the office he was entering were separated by a single inner door. 6 hours earlier, Nia Sterling had woken up at 5:12 in the morning. She woke up not because an alarm sounded, but because her 4-year-old daughter Maya had crawled into her bed. Maya was sleeping sideways across the worn pillow with one small elbow pressed against Nia's collarbone. Nia moved her daughter gently. She lay motionless in the cold room for 90 seconds, calculating numbers in her head. Childcare for today was $92 flat. She had $41.30 in her checking account. She had a folded $20 bill taped securely behind her phone case for emergencies. She had placed it there 21 days ago. She told herself she would not touch it today. She got up quietly. The apartment was a cramped one-bedroom unit on the second floor of an older building in South Side, Chicago. The hallway lights had been burned out for 7 weeks, and the landlord ignored text messages with practiced indifference. She had lived there for 8 months. Before that, she stayed in a tiny studio near Englewood. Before that, a small room rented from an acquaintance who changed the deadbolt locks on a frozen Thursday afternoon. Her 7-year-old son Marcus was already awake in the small living area. He was sitting on the rug next to his sister's fold-out sleeping mat, helping her put on her yellow sneakers. He did not do this because Nia had asked him to that morning. He did it because he had learned that mornings function smoother when help was offered before it was requested. He tied the small shoelaces carefully. He worked with concentration. Nia ironed the borrowed navy blazer on a bath towel spread across the kitchen table. The jacket belonged to her neighbor Paulette, who worked 12-hour night shifts at a senior care center. Paulette had hung it on Nia's door handle at 6 o'clock the previous evening, with a sticky note attached. The note told her to bring it back in one piece and secure the job. The small travel iron took 6 minutes to reach proper temperature. She had timed the process precisely. She timed everything in her home. The black shoes came from Dana, a woman she had worked with 2 years ago at a temporary staffing agency. Dana wore the exact same size. She had offered them without being asked, which meant Dana had noticed Nia looking at her footwear during lunch breaks. Nia had not hidden her need well enough. Her black dress pants were her own property. They were the single pair of formal trousers she owned that showed no visible wear around the seams. She kept them inside a plastic garment bag in the back of her closet. She wore them exclusively for job interviews. Those pants had been to 52 job interviews over the past 16 months. She did not check her bank application on her phone. She packed Marcus's school lunchbox with care. She made a peanut butter sandwich and cut it diagonally across the center. She did that because he preferred the shape and because certain small details deserved affection. She poured cereal into 2 plastic bowls. She stood in front of the small bathroom mirror while the children ate their breakfast. In her right hand, she held a black composition notebook with a cracked spine and yellowed paper edges. She did not open the cover. She held it close to her ribs the way some people hold an old family photograph before leaving home. It was not meant for reading in that moment. It was meant for strength. Nia had been forced out of the workforce 16 months ago during a freezing Tuesday in November. Her daughter Maya was diagnosed with a severe acute liver condition that required immediate hospitalization and 2 complex surgical procedures spaced 5 months apart. Nia slept in a vinyl reclining chair next to Maya's hospital bed for the first 3 weeks. Then she moved to a metal folding cot brought in by the pediatric nurses. Then back to the chair when another family needed the cot. 16 long months passed. She could not hold a regular job while living inside a pediatric care wing. She applied for every temporary assistance program the social worker recommended. She sold her second-hand furniture piece by piece. She lost her previous apartment because rent could not be paid from a hospital room. When Maya was finally discharged, they moved into a temporary shelter, then the studio, then the current one-bedroom unit. Her professional resume carried a 16-month blank gap that sat between her administrative experience and the present day like a fracture in glass. Every interviewer saw it immediately. Most asked about it within 2 minutes. She never explained the medical details. She had learned that saying her daughter was in the hospital turned a professional interview into a sympathy exercise. Sympathy had never once turned into a real job offer with a paycheck. So the 16-month gap remained unexplained on the paper, and her 52 failed interviews were recorded inside the black notebook. She had purchased the notebook for $3 4 days after her 5th rejection. She started it out of strict discipline rather than hope. Every interview was logged the same evening: the date, the corporate name, the position title, the questions asked, and the answers provided. Beside each answer, she marked a check if it sounded effective or a dash if it failed. Next to the dashes, she wrote revised versions that she practiced until they replaced the originals in her mind. She did not label them rejections. She labeled them data points. 52 data points collected across 16 grueling months. The notebook was organized with the cold precision of an engineer maintaining a machine log. The cover was soft from being opened on public transit buses, waiting rooms, and kitchen tables late at night. The spine was reinforced with clear tape that had turned yellow over time. At the very back of the notebook were 3 pages written in a handwriting that was not Naya's. The script was small and neat, written with a ballpoint pen that pressed deep into the paper. It belonged to Nia's mother, Eleanor Sterling. Eleanor had cleaned corporate office floors for 29 years in downtown Chicago. She worked 6 nights a week without missing a shift. She died 2 years ago from a sudden cardiac event while working on the 14th floor of a bank building. The 3 lines Eleanor wrote at the back of the book were titled in block letters: "Things they cannot take from you." The first item was your name. The second was how hard you work when nobody is watching. The third was how you walk into a room. Nia carried those 3 lines into every office. She had walked into 52 rooms in 16 months without receiving a single job offer. But she walked into every one of them the exact same way. The way her mother walked into office buildings at 10 o'clock at night. Damon Vance had built Vance Global Logistics over 14 relentless years. His firm specialized in supply chain optimization and corporate workforce management. His entire operational framework rested on quantifiable metrics, predictive algorithms, and performance indicators. He believed that if you could not measure a quality, you could not rely upon it. He was not a cold man by nature. He was a precise man who had learned that precision was the only structure that survived financial pressure. But Damon carried his own quiet ghost into every executive conference room. His mother had cleaned hospital corridors and retail stores for 30 years to raise him alone in West Chicago. She worked until her body simply stopped on a rainy Tuesday morning when he was 19 years old. Her employee identification badge hung inside the top drawer of his private desk in his penthouse office. The name on the laminated plastic badge was misspelled as Eleanor with 1 E missing. She had worn that incorrect name for 22 years because no manager cared enough to print a replacement. Damon opened that desk drawer every morning before reviewing his multi-million-dollar corporate schedules. As he walked down the carpeted hallway of the 48th floor toward his private office, he felt the memory of his mother stirring in his chest. The woman in the elevator had spoken about stability with the exact cadence his mother used 30 years ago. He stepped through his private side entrance and sat down at his desk. He did not open his laptop. He looked at the small inner door that connected his office to the executive interview suite. He knew that in less than 4 minutes, a woman in a borrowed blazer with a 16-month gap on her resume was going to walk through the main door of that room. He reached down and opened his top drawer. He touched the edge of his mother's plastic badge. The elevator cabin continued its measured ascent through the core of the Wacker Drive Tower. The mechanical hum of the cables provided a constant background noise that filled the small space between them. Nia Sterling stood completely still with her hands folded behind her back. She did not shift her weight again. Damon Vance kept his gaze fixed on the digital floor panel mounted above the heavy metallic doors. The glowing red numbers shifted from 31 to 32 with a deliberate rhythm. He felt the cold weight of his dark phone in his right palm. He had spent 14 years managing corporate systems designed to filter thousands of candidates through automated algorithms. Those algorithms evaluated candidates using standardized metrics like continuous employment, institutional reputation, and linear career trajectories. They were designed to eliminate risk before a candidate ever set foot inside an interview room. But the woman standing 3 feet away from him had just articulated a philosophy of labor that no corporate software could measure. She was not speaking from a script designed to impress an executive board. She was stating the reality of her daily existence. Nia took a slow breath and let her shoulders drop half an inch. She leaned slightly toward her left side, compensating for the thin leather sole of her worn shoe. Her eyes remained focused on the brushed metal surface of the elevator doors directly in front of her. She began rehearsing her final response out loud. Her voice was quiet, almost a whisper, yet every word possessed a distinct clarity that filled the enclosed cabin. "Why do you want this position at Vance Global Logistics?" she asked the empty space. She paused for 3 full seconds before answering her own question. "I do not seek this position for rapid career advancement or corporate prestige," she said softly. "I seek this position because I require stability." She pronounced the word stability with a depth of feeling that made the air in the cabin feel suddenly heavy. It was not a buzzword pulled from a professional management book. It was a tangible condition she had been fighting to secure for 16 difficult months. "Stability means my 7-year-old son Marcus stops looking at cardboard moving boxes every Sunday evening," she continued. "It means he stops asking me if we are going to pack our belongings again before the end of the month. It means my 4-year-old daughter Maya can draw a picture of her bedroom at daycare and know that the room will still be hers when I pick her up at 6 o'clock. It means I can look at a calendar and tell my children what next Thursday will look like, because the ground beneath our feet is no longer shifting. Stability is not a strategic career objective for me. It is a fundamental promise I made to 2 young children who are too young to understand why their mother spends her nights staring at a black composition notebook." The elevator passed the 42nd floor. The machinery above them decelerated smoothly as it approached the executive suites near the top of the skyscraper. Damon did not move a muscle. His right hand remained stationary at his side. He thought about his own mother, Eleanor, who had cleaned hospital corridors on night shifts 40 miles away in West Chicago. He remembered sitting at their kitchen table when he was 8 years old, watching her write down weekly grocery expenses in a small lined pad. She had written down every single penny with a broken pencil, subtracting 5-cent bus fares from her meager weekly wage until the remaining balance reached zero. She had sought that exact same stability her entire life, but the corporate systems of her era had viewed her merely as a temporary line item on a third-party maintenance contract. Nobody had ever invited her into a room with a glass table to ask her about her qualifications. Nobody had ever listened to her explain the mathematics of her survival. The elevator reached the 48th floor and came to a final stop with a deep, resonant chime. The heavy sliding doors parted smoothly to reveal the executive reception floor. The floor was covered in dark blue carpet, and floor-to-ceiling windows offered a panoramic view of the Chicago River stretching toward Lake Michigan. Nia did not hesitate. She adjusted the shoulder strap of her handbag, smoothed the front of her borrowed navy blazer with both palms, and stepped out onto the plush carpet. She walked with a measured, deliberate stride toward the central reception desk, where an administrative assistant sat behind a polished marble counter. Damon waited 2 full seconds inside the cabin before stepping out behind her. He did not follow her directly toward the reception desk. He turned to the right, walking down a private corridor that led directly to his executive suite. Nia reached the reception counter and stood politely in front of the young woman seated behind the marble desk. The nameplate on the counter read Clara Jenkins. Clara looked up from her computer monitor with a neutral expression. "Good morning," Nia said, keeping her voice calm and professional. "My name is Nia Sterling. I have an interview scheduled for 9 o'clock for the Junior Operations Coordinator position." Clara checked her digital calendar, typed briefly on her keyboard, and nodded once. "Welcome to Vance Global Logistics, Miss Sterling," Clara said, her tone professional but detached. "Please take a seat in the waiting area to your left. The hiring panel will be ready for you in 6 minutes." "Thank you," Nia replied. She turned toward the waiting area, which consisted of 4 high-backed leather chairs arranged around a glass coffee table. She sat down in the chair closest to the hallway, placing her handbag neatly on the floor beside her right foot. She kept her back straight against the leather support. Inside her bag, the black composition notebook rested against her wallet. She did not reach down to pull it out. She did not open it to review her 52 entries of interview data. She knew every checkmark and every dash recorded on those pages by heart. She placed her hands flat on her thighs, beneath the edge of her borrowed blazer, and closed her eyes for 5 seconds. She remembered the 3 lines written in ballpoint pen at the back of her notebook. Your name. How hard you work when nobody is watching. How you walk into a room. Meanwhile, inside his private corner office, Damon Vance stood near his massive mahogany desk. He had set his leather gym bag on the floor and was looking out the floor-to-ceiling window at the gray skyline of Chicago. The city below was moving beneath a overcast morning sky, but his mind was focused entirely on the small inner door situated on the west wall of his office. That inner door connected his private office directly to the main executive conference room, where the hiring panel was preparing to conduct the 9 o'clock interview. The panel consisted of 2 senior directors, Marcus Vance, his vice president of operations, and Patricia Holloway, the senior director of human resources. Patricia was a thorough, highly analytical executive who relied strictly on corporate metrics and resume continuity. She had spent 12 years managing recruitment for major logistics firms, and she viewed employment gaps as significant red flags that required immediate disqualification. Damon walked slowly across the room toward his desk. He reached down and pulled open the shallow top drawer on the right side. Lying in the center of the wooden tray was his mother's old employee identification badge. The laminated plastic was yellowed along the edges, and the metal clip was slightly bent from years of use. The printed text read, Eleanor Vance, Maintenance Dept. The missing letter E in her first name remained as stark and uncorrected as it had been 30 years ago. He picked up the badge and held it in his right palm. He felt the rough texture of the peeling lamination against his fingers. He had built Vance Global Logistics to prove that a kid from West Chicago could master the complex systems of global commerce. He had created algorithms that predicted supply chain disruptions down to the minute. But in building those perfect corporate structures, he had implemented the exact same cold, unseeing evaluation methods that had reduced his mother to an invisible worker with a misspelled name. He looked at the interconnecting door on his west wall. He knew that Patricia Holloway had already printed the candidate dossier for Nia Sterling. He knew that the 16-month gap sitting on the second page of that dossier would be the first item Patricia underlined with her red pen. Damon placed his mother's badge back inside the top drawer, leaving the drawer slightly open. He straightened his dark pullover, adjusted his wristwatch, and walked toward the inner connecting door. He did not call his assistant to announce his presence. He simply placed his hand on the brass handle, turned it quietly, and stepped into the executive conference room. The conference room door opened precisely at 9 o'clock. Clara Jenkins stood near the threshold and gestured politely toward the interior. Nia Sterling stood up from the leather chair, smoothed the lapels of her borrowed navy blazer, and walked into the room with a measured, deliberate stride. The room was vast, dominated by a rectangular glass conference table that reflected the overcast sky over the Chicago River. 3 high-backed executive chairs were positioned on the far side of the table. 2 of them were occupied. Patricia Holloway sat on the left, her silver-framed glasses resting on her nose, and a sleek pen held balanced in her right fingers. Marcus Vance sat in the center, smiling with professional warmth as he gestured toward the single leather chair set on the near side of the glass surface. The third chair on the right side was currently empty. A leather-bound folder rested closed in front of it, accompanied by an untouched glass of water and a black ballpoint pen placed diagonally across the cover. "Good morning, Miss Sterling," Patricia said, her voice crisp and measured. "Please take a seat. I am Patricia Holloway, Senior Director of Human Resources, and this is Marcus Vance, Vice President of Operations." Nia walked to the chair, pulled it back without making a sound on the carpet, and sat down smoothly. She placed her handbag on the floor beside her left ankle, keeping it tucked against the metal leg of the chair where it would not obstruct anyone's view. The black composition notebook stayed hidden inside the synthetic leather pouch. She rested her hands flat against her thighs beneath the table line, ensuring her fingers stayed motionless. "Thank you for seeing me today," Nia said. Her voice was calm, clear, and pitched at the exact volume needed to fill the room without strain. Patricia opened the thick paper dossier resting before her. She glanced down at the top page, her pen hovering over the neatly formatted resume. Marcus adjusted his jacket and rested his elbows on the glass table. "We have reviewed your background, Miss Sterling," Patricia began, her tone professional and direct. "Your early work as an administrative assistant at the logistics agency shows strong operational organization. Your references speak highly of your attention to detail during high-volume shipping periods." Patricia turned the page over with a faint rustle of paper. Her hand stopped moving. Her silver pen descended to the center of the page, where a wide horizontal space separated her early employment history from the present date. She drew a clean red line beside the entry that recorded a 16-month silence. "However," Patricia continued, looking up over her glasses, "we must address the 16-month gap in your professional record. From November of 2 years ago until the present month, there is no documented employment or educational enrollment. At Vance Global Logistics, our operational roles require continuous engagement with changing supply chain management software. A gap of this duration represents a significant deviation from our standard stability metrics." Nia did not look away from Patricia's eyes. She did not shift her posture in the leather chair. She had sat in 52 rooms over the past 16 months, and in 47 of those rooms, an interviewer's pen had drawn that exact same line on her paper. She knew the precise script that usually followed. She knew the polite tilt of the head, the softened tone of sympathy, and the eventual phrase explaining that other candidates possessed more recent experience. Before Nia could utter her response, the small inner door on the west wall of the conference room swung open. Damon Vance stepped into the room without an apology for his arrival. He was wearing his dark pullover, his expression unreadable as he walked toward the empty executive chair at the head of the table. Patricia blinked in surprise, quickly adjusting her dossier, while Marcus nodded respectfully toward his chief executive. "Mr. Vance," Patricia said softly, "we have just commenced the interview with Miss Sterling." Damon did not take the folder Patricia pushed toward him. He did not pick up the black ballpoint pen resting on the leather cover. He sat down in the high-backed chair, placed his broad hands flat on the reflective glass surface, and looked directly across the table into Nia Sterling's eyes. Nia recognized him instantly. The dark pullover was the same. The quiet, watchful eyes were the same. The posture was the exact posture of the man who had stood 3 feet to her left in an old elevator, while she confessed her deepest fears to the empty air. Her heart struck her ribs once with a hard, sudden thud, but her face remained completely composed. She did not drop her gaze. She did not offer an excuse for speaking aloud in the elevator. She sat in Paulette's borrowed blazer with the re-hemmed cuffs, holding his look with the quiet dignity her mother had taught her to carry into every room. Damon spoke first, his deep voice cutting through the silent room like a blade. "Miss Holloway was asking about the 16-month gap on your resume, Miss Sterling," Damon said, his tone devoid of corporate fluff. "I would like to hear your explanation. Not the polished answer you prepared for a standard human resources screening, but the actual truth of those 16 months. Patricia shifted uncomfortably in her seat, looking at Damon with a subtle frown. But Marcus remained quiet, sensing the sudden change in the room's atmosphere. Nia took one slow, controlled breath through her nose. She kept her hands flat against her knees beneath the table. "My daughter Maya was diagnosed with an acute liver condition 16 months ago," Nia said, her voice steady and stripped of all self-pity. "She required immediate hospitalization at Chicago Children's Hospital, followed by 2 major surgical procedures spaced 5 months apart. I spent 16 months living inside a hospital room. I slept in a vinyl chair beside her bed because my daughter was 4 years old and she needed her mother present every single night." The room fell into an absolute, breathless silence. Patricia's pen remained stationary over her red line. "I could not hold a traditional 9-to-5 job while living in a pediatric ward," Nia continued, her eyes fixed entirely on Damon. "I sold my furniture to pay for medication. I lost my apartment because rent cannot be paid from a hospital chair. When my daughter was discharged 3 months ago, we lived in a temporary shelter in Englewood before I secured our current 1-bedroom apartment." She paused for 2 seconds, letting her words settle in the air like heavy stone blocks. "I do not write those details on my resume, Ms. Sterling added, her tone hardening into pure iron. "And I do not explain them in job interviews, because the moment a candidate says the word hospital, the interview ceases to be an evaluation of skill. It becomes an exercise in sympathy. Sympathy is a pleasant human emotion, but it has never once paid a landlord or bought a box of cereal for my children. I am not seeking your pity today. I am seeking a position that I have the capacity to perform better than anyone else you will interview this week. Patricia stared at Nia, her lips slightly parted. Marcus looked down at his notes, his expression shifting from corporate neutrality to deep respect. Damon remained motionless at the head of the table. He looked at the young black woman sitting across from him, wearing a blazer that did not fit her shoulders and shoes with an uneven sole, declaring her refusal to accept charity with the fiercest pride he had ever witnessed. He remembered his mother Eleanor, standing in their small West Chicago kitchen, throwing away a box of donated canned goods because the local charity worker had spoken to her as if she were a helpless child rather than a working woman. He realized in that exact moment that Nia Sterling possessed something that no corporate training program or Ivy League business degree could ever instill. She possessed an absolute unbreakable human dignity. Damon reached forward and pushed the paper dossier away from his place on the table. You mentioned the word stability in the elevator, Damon said quietly, acknowledging the shared moment without a hint of hesitation. You said stability was a promise you made to your children. Patricia's head snapped toward Damon in total confusion, but Damon ignored her reaction completely. If I offered you a temporary entry-level position in our primary freight dispatch facility starting this Monday, Damon said, leaning forward slightly, it would pay $23 an hour. It would require you to manage night shift inventory tracking, where a single misplaced digit can delay a cargo container for 48 hours. The work is relentless, the hours are unforgiving, and there will be no special concessions made for your personal circumstances. You will be judged strictly on your output. He rested his forearms on the glass table and held her eyes. I am not offering you a handout, Miss Sterling. I am offering you an arena to prove whether your discipline matches your words. Will you accept those terms? Nia did not hesitate for a single second. She did not smile, she did not gasp, and she did not offer a breathless expression of gratitude. She sat upright in her borrowed jacket, met the CEO's gaze with absolute steadiness, and gave her response. I will be here at 7 o'clock on Monday morning, Nia said. And I will not be late. Monday morning arrived under a dark Chicago sky that carried the bitter chill of early winter. Nia Sterling stepped off the number 29 bus at 6:42 a.m., 28 minutes before her scheduled shift at the Vance Global Freight Dispatch Facility on the south side. The dispatch center was a sprawling concrete structure where high-capacity diesel trucks moved in continuous loops beneath industrial floodlights. Her new workspace was a metal desk situated in the corner of a noisy logistics floor, surrounded by glowing computer monitors and the constant rumble of freight engines outside. Her supervisor was a man named Gregory Vance, a veteran logistics manager who had spent 22 years on the loading docks. Gregory looked at Nia over his reading glasses with obvious skepticism, his eyes taking in her modest clothing and her lack of a formal supply chain degree. This is not an administrative office where you file memos, Miss Sterling, Gregory said, his voice rough from decades of shouting over diesel motors. We handle 400 cargo manifests an hour. If a single driver receives an incorrect route code, a container sits in a yard in Indiana for 12 hours, and that mistake costs us $4,000 in penalty fees. You have 3 weeks to prove you can keep up with this pace. I understand, Nia said quietly. She did not ask for a lighter workload or an extended training period. She sat down at her assigned monitor and went to work. The corporate dispatch system was complex, relying on automated routing algorithms that prioritize speed over local road conditions. For the first 4 days, Nia remained at her desk for 10 consecutive hours, taking only a 12-minute break to eat a sandwich she had packed from home. When her shift ended at 5 o'clock in the evening, her day was far from over. She took 2 buses back to South Side to pick up Maya from daycare and Marcus from his after-school program. She cooked dinner on her small stove, helped Marcus with his second-grade math worksheets, and put both children to bed by 8:30. Then, while the small apartment fell into silence, Nia sat at her kitchen table under a single yellow bulb. She opened her black composition notebook, turning past the 52 recorded job interviews to the blank pages at the middle. She drew detailed routing diagrams of the Chicago freight corridors by hand, memorizing alternative truck routes, secondary way station schedules, and construction delays that the automated corporate software regularly overlooked. She worked until her eyes burned with fatigue, pressing her fingers against her temples to stay awake. She remembered her mother Eleanor, who used to come home at 4 in the morning with swollen feet, sit at the kitchen counter, and iron her work uniforms for the next night without a single word of complaint. Nia refused to break. By her third week at the facility, the shift workers began to notice a change in the dispatch floor's efficiency. Nia did not rely solely on the automated software outputs. When a manifest arrived on her screen, she cross-referenced the destination with her hand-drawn route maps. She identified subtle timing conflicts before the trucks ever left the loading bays, saving the department 38 hours of cumulative transit delays in her first 20 days. Gregory Vance said nothing to her directly, but he stopped checking her digital entries every hour. The red marks on her daily performance sheets disappeared entirely, replaced by neat green approval stamps. Then, on a freezing Thursday evening in late November, the weather shifted violently. A massive, unpredicted lake-effect blizzard swept across Lake Michigan, dropping 14 inches of heavy snow on the Chicago metropolitan area within 4 hours. Temperatures plunged to 3 degrees below zero, and visibility on the interstate highways dropped to near zero. Inside the Vance Global Dispatch Center, emergency warning lights flashed red across the main operational board. The automated logistics server, overwhelmed by sudden road closures and mass accidents along Interstate 80, suffered a critical system lock. The screen froze, leaving 248 active freight trucks stranded without updated navigation orders. Among those stranded vehicles was a specialized convoy carrying $12.5 million worth of temperature-sensitive medical diagnostic equipment bound for O'Hare International Airport. If those containers remained idling in the blizzard without power for more than 90 minutes, the temperature control systems would fail, ruining the entire shipment and triggering a massive contractual penalty that would devastate Vance Global's regional reputation. In the central control room, senior dispatchers panicked. Managers shouted over radios, trying to manually reroute drivers using static paper maps that did not account for localized snowdrift blockades. Gregory Vance stood before the main board, his forehead slick with sweat as he tried to contact Regional Traffic Authority, who were not answering emergency lines. "We have 62 minutes before those thermal units lose power," Gregory yelled over the noise of alarm sirens. "The main automated system is completely unresponsive. We cannot find an open arterial route through the South Side rail yards." Damon Vance arrived at the dispatch facility 20 minutes later, his heavy coat dusted with snow. He walked into the frantic control room with Vice President Marcus Vance and 2 senior systems engineers. Damon looked at the frozen computer monitors, his expression grim as he realized the automated infrastructure he had spent a decade building had failed at the precise moment it was needed most. "Is there any viable secondary route that bypasses the Interstate 80 gridlock?" Damon demanded, his voice projecting authority over the chaos. The senior systems engineer shook his head in frustration. "The software is down, Mr. Vance. The digital maps are not updating. We are blind out there." Nia Sterling stood up from her metal desk at the back of the room. She held her black composition notebook tightly in her left hand. She had spent 3 weeks studying the physical geography of the Chicago rail corridors and industrial access roads, roads that she had traveled on public transit buses for 7 years while taking her daughter to specialist medical appointments. She walked directly to the central conference table where Damon, Gregory, and the senior directors were standing around a paper map. She set her black notebook down on the glass surface, opening it to a page filled with hand-drawn street diagrams and precise time-distance calculations. "There is a way through," Nia said. Her voice was not loud, but it possessed an absolute, sharp clarity that instantly cut through the panic in the room. Gregory glared at her in stress. "Miss Sterling, this is a $12 million emergency. We do not have time for—" "Let her speak," Damon interrupted, his dark eyes locking onto Nia's calm face. Nia pointed her finger at a narrow industrial bypass route running parallel to the Norfolk Southern rail lines along 63rd Street. "The automated system always routes freight through the Interstate 80 junction because it prioritizes highway speeds," Nia explained, her finger moving steadily across her handwritten diagram. "But that highway is completely blocked by 3 jackknifed semi-trucks at exit 42. However, the old industrial access road along 63rd Street is sheltered by the elevated rail embankment. It remains clear of major snowdrifts during northeasterly storms." She looked directly at Gregory and then at Damon. "If we direct the convoy drivers to exit at Pulaski Road, take the 63rd Street freight lane, and enter the airport cargo terminal through the southern service gate on Mannheim Road, they will bypass the highway gridlock entirely." The distance is 4 miles longer, but the travel time will be 26 minutes. They will arrive at the airport terminal with 18 minutes of backup power remaining on their thermal units. The senior systems engineer looked at her handwritten notes, then at the physical map on the table. That access road is not listed on our primary commercial logistics corridors, he said. Because it is a municipal service road maintained by the city water department, Nia replied without hesitation. My mother worked night shifts at the bakery next to that rail yard for 6 years. That road is salted every 2 hours by the city maintenance yard on 79th Street. It is open right now. Damon did not pause to consult an algorithm. He did not ask for a secondary committee vote. He looked at Nia Sterling, seeing the absolute certainty in her eyes, the certainty born of a lifetime spent navigating the hard physical realities of the city. Get the convoy lead on the emergency radio line immediately, Damon ordered Gregory. Issue Miss Sterling's route coordinates to every driver in the fleet. Right now. Gregory grabbed the radio microphone, his hands trembling slightly as he broadcasted Nia's exact directions to the stranded drivers. Across the frozen expanse of the Chicago suburbs, 24 heavy freight trucks shifted their gears, pulled off the grid-locked interstate highway, and turned onto the quiet industrial access road along 63rd Street. For 24 long minutes, the control room remained dead silent. Everyone stood around the central table, listening to the static hum of the radio speaker. Damon stood 3 feet from Nia, watching her as she stood with her hands folded neatly in front of her borrowed navy blazer, her expression completely steady. Then the radio speaker crackled to life with sudden clarity. Control, this is Convoy Alpha Leader, a voice shouted over the radio, accompanied by the sound of heavy engines idling smoothly. We have bypassed the highway blockade. We have just entered the southern cargo gate at O'Hare Terminal 4. All thermal units are operating at 98% capacity. Cargo is secure. I repeat, cargo is secure. The control room erupted into loud cheers. Managers slapped each other on the back, and Gregory slumped into his chair with a massive sigh of relief. Nia did not cheer. She took a quiet breath, closed her black composition notebook, and picked it up off the table. She turned to walk back to her desk to finish logging her daily paper manifests. Damon Vance stepped into her path, blocking her way softly. He looked down at the black notebook in her hand, then up at her face. You saved this company $12.5 million tonight, Ms. Sterling, Damon said, his voice quiet enough that only she could hear it over the noise in the room. I did not do it to save $12 million, Mr. Vance, Nia replied gently, meeting his gaze with unyielding pride. I did it because it was my shift, and on my shift nothing falls apart. 3 months after the historic blizzard that paralyzed the Chicago transit corridors, the 48th floor of the Vance Global Logistics Tower on Wacker Drive was quiet in the early morning light. The morning sun broke through the winter clouds, reflecting off the glass conference tables and illuminating the panoramic view of the Chicago River below. Inside the main executive suite, Damon Vance sat behind his mahogany desk. He opened his shallow right-hand drawer and looked down at his mother's old laminated employee badge. The misspelled name printed on the yellowed plastic, Eleanor Vance, seemed to carry a different weight now. It no longer represented silent grief or an unhealed wound from a system that ignored working people. It represented a reminder of why his company existed. He closed the drawer gently, leaving it unlocked. Today was a different kind of morning. At 8:15 a.m., Nia Sterling walked through the glass doors of the executive floor. She was wearing a tailored charcoal suit that fit her frame perfectly, paid for with her own earned income. Her steps were measured, confident, and light. She carried her black composition notebook inside her briefcase, resting beside a signed contract. She walked past the reception desk, where Clara Jenkins greeted her with a genuine, respectful smile. Nia nodded warmly in response and proceeded directly toward the corner office that now carried her new official title on the brass doorplate, Nia Sterling, Senior Operations Director. Her promotion had not been granted as a corporate favor or a public relations gesture. It had been ratified unanimously by the executive board after her manual routing system saved the company $7 million in quarterly operating costs across 3 regional transport hubs. She had earned every square inch of that office through raw discipline, flawless execution, and a profound understanding of labor that no software could duplicate. That evening, Nia returned to her new home, a spacious, sunlit 3-bedroom apartment in a quiet, tree-lined neighborhood in Hyde Park. The building was secure, the hallway lights worked reliably, and the landlord was a professional management firm that answered inquiries within minutes. When she opened the front door, 7-year-old Marcus and 4-year-old Maya ran across the hardwood floor to greet her. Marcus took her briefcase and set it neatly by the entryway table, a habit he had built out of care rather than obligation. "Mom," Marcus said, looking up at her as she hung her coat in the closet, "I finished putting all my books on the built-in shelves in my bedroom." Nia knelt down and smoothed his hair with her hand. "Do you need any extra boxes to organize the rest of your things?" she asked softly. Marcus looked at her for a moment, his young face completely calm. "No, Mom," he said with a small smile. "We do not need any boxes anymore. We are staying here." The question that had haunted their lives for 16 painful months, whether they would be forced to pack their belongings and move again before the end of the month, simply vanished into the quiet air of their home. Its absence was louder and sweeter than any corporate accolade Nia had ever received. Later that night, after putting the children to sleep under warm blankets, Nia sat at her dining table near the window, overlooking the city lights. She opened her black composition notebook to the very last page. She turned past 52 rejection entries, past the handwritten routing diagrams of Chicago rail yards, and looked at the 3 lines written in ballpoint pen by her late mother Eleanor. "Things they cannot take from you. 1. Your name. 2. How hard you work when nobody is watching. 3. How you walk into a room." Nia picked up her pen and wrote a single line beneath her mother's words, her hand steady as the ink pressed deep into the paper. 4. The stability you build with your own hands. She closed the notebook and set it on the shelf beside her children's books. 6 months later, Vance Global Logistics officially launched a groundbreaking corporate initiative designed by Nia Sterling and funded by Damon Vance. The program was named the Eleanor and Eleanor Foundation, honoring both of their late mothers who had spent their lives cleaning floors in buildings that never learned their names. The initiative specifically targeted single mothers and caregivers returning to the workforce after extended medical or family care gaps. Instead of filtering candidates through automated algorithm screens that penalized nonlinear resumes, the foundation provided direct, paid 3-month operational apprenticeships, professional mentorship, and guaranteed interview placements with leading regional firms. On the day of the foundation's official inauguration, Damon Vance stood at the podium in the main auditorium of the Wacker Drive building. He looked out at the audience of working women, community leaders, and corporate executives. "For 14 years, I built systems that evaluated people using numbers on a screen," Damon said, his voice echoing with deep sincerity through the hall. "I believed that efficiency was the highest form of professional excellence. I was wrong. The most reliable indicator of human capability is not a linear resume or an unbroken line of corporate employment. It is the resilience a person displays when life strips away every resource except their dignity." He turned slightly and gestured toward Nia Sterling, who stood near the side of the stage holding her daughter's hand. Nia Sterling walked into an elevator in this building rehearsing answers to questions nobody had asked her yet, Damon concluded. She did not ask for sympathy, and she refused to accept charity. She offered her capability, her pride, and her relentless work ethic. She reminded us that the true strength of any organization resides in the dignity of the human beings who show up when nobody is watching. The auditorium erupted into standing ovation. Nia stood tall in her suit, holding her daughter Maya close while Marcus stood beside her, looking up at his mother with absolute pride. She did not cry. She looked out at the crowd, held her head high, and stepped forward to take her place at the podium. She had walked into 52 rooms where people saw only a gap on a piece of paper. But she had walked into the 53rd room as the architect of her own destiny, carrying her mother's name, her own unbroken strength, and a promise of stability that would never be broken again.